Welcome back. And now we have to have a look at what undoubtedly classes as a heavyweight, important bit of motorcycling news. It concerns that industry titan Harley-Davidson and the replacement of a legend of a model with something that is undeniably revolutionary, at least for the American manufacturer. Now, don't get me wrong, I admit that we have often, in all likelihood far too frequently, indulged in our fair share of cheap shots when it comes to the hardly dangerous brand. Underpowered, devoid of technology, seriously overweight, and trading on glories so far in the distant past that you'd need to be at least 100 years old to have any idea what those glories might be. And we haven't even mentioned the pricing that often seems, based on things like the relative dearth of 21st century technology, greedy, bordering on delusional. Thing is, although there's more than an element of truth to these digs, Harley-Davidson has actually been quite forward-thinking at times over the years. Think of models like the V-Rod and more recently the Livewire. Who would have thought that Harley would have been the first of the major manufacturers to the market with a big electric bike? But a lot of the abuse has been well deserved. When I rode the 1200 Sportster, it did nothing but disappoint. Dreadful power output, dreary handling, inexcusably heavy clutch and throttle, and an accessories catalogue that made an already egregiously overpriced bike a kind of gateway drug to further highway robbery. As you might be able to tell, I wasn't a fan of the previous Sportsters. Well, the Sportster has been around for over 60 years as a traditional air-cooled model, but ever-tightening emissions regulations meant production was halted last year. The Sportster, the best-selling Harley icon, the bike I love to hate as the very epitome of style over substance, was no more. But now it's back, and it is very different, but in a way also very familiar. Allow me to try and explain. This new model bears more than a passing resemblance to the high-performance custom concept that appeared a couple of years ago. And that's no bad thing, because I have to say, it's a bit of a looker. It definitely has the air of something from the beginning of this century, rather than a model from the middle of the last. But it still has some trademark Harley styling cues like the peanut tank and the tail unit that is quite XR-ish. The headlight seems to be part of the new generation family look, with its rectangular shape echoing what the Pan America has recently made part of its visual identity. Otherwise, it's more what's missing that defines the new Sportster. A distinct lack of chrome for starters, thankfully. No spindly fork legs and front wheel, and no twin rear shocks. Here you get a piggyback rear shock and a set of meaty 43mm upside down forks from Shower. There's also a fat 160 tyre on the 17-inch front wheel and a traditional cruiser 16-inch rim at the rear, wearing a 180. It's a chunky, squat, muscular appearance, and on looks alone it is a massive improvement over the oldie. Massive improvement is also an apt description of what you can expect from the jump in performance, because instead of the previous, 60 horsepower? Harley never usually quotes horsepower figures for obvious reasons, I would have thought, but this new bike delivers a very appealing 121 horsepower from its 1252cc liquid-cooled V-twin. Yes, it is effectively the same unit that makes 150 horsepower in the Pan America, but here it has got smaller valves and ports within a different cylinder head that also has a redesigned combustion chamber. The variable valve timing of the Pan remains, but now has different phasing, and there's also changes to the cam profiles and airbox. The new engine also plays a large part in the chassis as well, since the swing arm and front and rear frames all bolt directly onto the motor, which removes the need for a bulky and weighty central frame. You get a 6-speed gearbox and a slipper clutch, and of course on the electronic side there are multiple riding modes, including the option to customize to suit your own riding style, with variations in engine braking, ABS intervention and traction control levels. Braking is taken care of by Brembo with a single radial monoblock caliper up front with a sizable 320mm disc. The instruments are, as is the case these days, in the form of a TFT screen. 4 inches across in this case. It can impersonate a traditional analog appearance, or you can choose to control other functions like the riding modes or monitor the tyre pressures. And of course you get Bluetooth connectivity to your phone so you can control your calls and your music. All in all, the Sportster S is a thoroughly modern bike with at least double the performance of the model it replaces. That is a serious jump in ability, perhaps not surprising since we are effectively talking about a bike that first appeared in the 1950s, but still, this is a huge change for a model that was designed to be suitable for those new to biking. The result is a bike that will retail for about 15,000 euros, or somewhere in the region of 260,000 rand. That might at first seem like a lot if you're looking at it as a replacement for the outgoing Sportster, but judge for what it now brings to the table as opposed to the tired old offering it had become. It's bordering on being a bit of a bargain, at least in Harley-Davidson terms. It certainly looks like it has the goods to take it to Indian's very impressive Scout, and for the first time in my professional life I'm genuinely intrigued about riding a Sportster. Unfortunately, years of cheap jibes and rubbish jokes will probably see me waiting quite a while until I do actually ride one, but that's okay because, as I said at the start of this piece, there's actually something pretty familiar about the Sportster S. Do you remember the V-Rod? I do. I always rather liked it, and the street rod that I managed to crash while practicing backing it in the rain. Yeah, I know, I'm a simpleton. Anyway, the rods always looked good and went well too, thanks to a liquid-cooled 1247cc V-twin that made 125 horsepower. It was a fair bit heavier than the Sportster S, so the handling should be a bit more sprightly on the new bike, but the engines are similar, so I have a rough idea how the new bike might feel. How the times have changed, or at least Harley-Davidson will be hoping that they have changed, because the V-Rod didn't exactly go down well with the traditional hog clientele. Either they're going to ignore them if they throw their branded cuddly toys out of the cot this time, or they figured enough of them have shuffled off into the afterlife that the balance of power has changed and it's time now to listen to the youngsters, which in Harley's demographic is anyone under the age of 70. One last cheap shot for the good old days. Seems like a good enough place to end this episode and remind you that we'll be back again, same time, same place, next week. See you then.